So now we'll hear from Oliver Rees. Oliver is part of Model Court, which is a collective, an artist collective. I'll give you their names. Lawrence Abu Hamdan, Sitzel, how do you pronounce your name?
Meineke Hansen.
Sitzel Meineke Hansen, Lorenzo Bezzani, and Oliver Rees. They interrogate the production, dissemination, and transmission of the law, exploring how images and representations complicate the production of legal space and the borders between nations. So it's images, law, borders. And we will watch a film that they have made together as a group, and Oliver, who is an artist based in London, and also he's completing a PhD under the title Drawing is Tragedy, will give a short introduction to the film, very short, and the discussion will happen after the screening with him, and also with Lawrence Abu Hamdan, also an artist based in London, or between London and Beirut. He's in Beirut right now and was unable to join us, but he will be with us on Skype after the screening.
Okay, so thank you for inviting me today. It's nice to be here. And thanks to Declan as well for that talk. And hopefully in the discussion, which I'm really interested in having, so I'll keep this introduction very sort of close, ideas that he raised, especially about resolution, maybe thinking about that as a media term, and also the outsider will be able to sort of expand upon in that discussion. I was just going to trace the sort of activity of the group up until making this film, because I don't really want to talk over the film before we see it, but just to respond to what we did. But Model Court started in 2009 with an exhibition in the CCA in Glasgow, where we did an exhibition that was based, well, the centre of the exhibition was based on we worked with an architect called Hiraku Kitai, who was working on a World Bank commission for designing a courtroom for manuals for developing countries, so-called developing countries. And this manual was a kind of set of standards for how you can make courtrooms in places that didn't have sort of established spaces for justice. So the courtroom was really a set of measurements and a set of requirements that an architectural space needed for a trial to take place. And what we asked her to do was to redesign the gallery in Glasgow to be a courtroom, like how she would do it. And really what she focused on was the sort of like movement of people in and out of the space. So where doors were placed was very important, and the way where judges could enter and exit, where witnesses could enter and exit. And there's sort of measurements of how high the door should be, where the judge's bench should be. So you have this kind of like spatial configuration of the courtroom, which is kind of the starting point for what we were interested in our work. After that exhibition in 2010, we did a residency in Finland, where we didn't really know what we were doing when we actually went to Finland, but I had been reading about a trial that was taking place at that time of Francois Bazaramba, who was a Rwandan who was seeking asylum in Finland. And he was living outside Helsinki in a small town called Porvoo. And the district court of Porvoo, this small town, had arrested him during his asylum procedure for his role in the Rwandan genocide in 1994. And they, under this principle of universal jurisdiction, which we'll talk about more later, they took on the trial themselves. So they tried Francois Bazaramba in Finland, well, from Finland, for his role in the 1994 genocide. And during the process, they had to relocate this court in Tanzania and Rwanda. When we visited the trial, we kind of, this is how we sort of stumbled upon this case, which you're going to see. The first time in 2010, I think they were expecting a big clamor of media attention, so they really invited us into this process. They didn't really know who we were. I mean, we were quite a strange sort of thing, sort of like media, interested in media somehow, but they were really, really interested in us sort of like getting into this trial. They were showing us all the footage. We sort of interviewed everyone to do this trial. And they had just come back from Tanzania and Rwanda, where they had to relocate the court to collect testimony and witnesses. all the time, Francois Bazzaramba had to stay in Finland in a jail in Vanta so they could sort of retain sovereignty over it. So the media infrastructure that was required to sort of bridge the distance and make this connection between Finland, which is so far in the north, and East Africa, was basically what helped conduct the trial and facilitated the trial. So you had this sort of universal idea of universal jurisdiction and this media infrastructure that carries that principle. So that's kind of how we came across the case study. And then Gasworks invited us to do an exhibition, which we did this year, and we decided to sort of revisit this case study, which we continued working on for the last few years. And this time we went back to Finland, and we sort of, in our conversations around producing this film and the exhibition, we sort of centered on this one figure that we realized we didn't get to speak to the first time. And this man is called Thomas Elfgren, who all the footage from the film that you're about to see is from his archive. And he's a policeman, and he's the only single person that followed this trial right from its beginning to its conclusion, and it ended last year. The Court of Appeal sort of redid the firm verdict. And he was responsible for arranging the technological infrastructure which allowed the trial to take place. So he's kind of this technical man, and we visited him at his house, and we went through his archive. And it was not just the archive of the official court material; it was also his own personal footage, which through his 10, 11 years in Rwanda, he had taken himself. So there's an amazing sort of amount of visual material that we kind of engaged with in making this film, and that's like a prelude to the film. So hopefully afterwards we could really sort of talk about the sort of aspects that we found interesting in this and open up the discussion to different bits.
Hello.
Hi, Lawrence. How are you? Your video's not on.
Lawrence, can you hear us?
Hey. No, I'm hearing you. Okay. Hello.
Great.
Hi, everyone can see you now.
Maybe I should turn the camera around for you. See where
It's
you
nice.
Fantastic.
Did you, Lawrence, or you, Oliver, want to say something after the screening before we take questions?
For me, it'd be great to open up the questions straight away.
Yeah, that would be great. Into the discussion.
Well, any questions? Anybody to start?
I just want to ask the obvious question first as to why it wasn't just a matter of extradition, he wasn't just forced back.
Well, they looked into extraditing it through the process, and they couldn't send him to the ICTR because they wouldn't accept the case, and they couldn't send him back to Rwanda because in their eyes at the time he wouldn't receive a fair trial in the Rwandan system. So they're the reasons that they ended up taking on.
And also they brought witnesses to Finland. That's how they began the proceedings initially. But the witnesses sort of ran off into Europe, and then so they had to change the idea to then travel to Rwanda as the judges, because, of course, the sort of scandal of asylum seekers and people slipping into Europe is such a cause of concern these days that they didn't want to kind of have this reading of the trial. So that was another thing they tried early on. Other ways of kind of synchronizing the two spaces.
they wouldn't take on the case. It was just as simple as that. And then their only option in the end was to either take on the case themselves or to send it back to Rwanda, which they couldn't do because they didn't think they'd receive a fair trial.
So who had invited him originally?
Well, it was quite strange because he had applied for asylum in Finland in 2002. And while they were working through his application, someone had spotted that he was in Anna Lindh Foundation's Human Rights Watch report, Leave None to Tell the Story, and he was mentioned in that, and then I think Redress put pressure on the police in Finland saying that there's someone in Finland who was involved in the genocide, and they arrested him on the basis of this kind of pressure.
I have a question here. Can I ask that whoever wants to ask a question take the microphone for recording purposes, and also because I'm not entirely sure that Lawrence can hear us otherwise. Yeah.
I can hear perfectly, yeah. It's fine. But take the microphone anyway. I don't want to stand in the way of technology.
I just wanted to ask, this may be the first funny film ever made about the Rwandan genocide. Maybe the only one that ever will be made. I mean, it's a genuinely amusing piece of work. I mean, not throughout, but at different points. And I just wondered, could you say anything about that? I mean, that really, a really impressive use of shifts in tone and particularly the introduction of kind of, moments of incidental or accidental or certainly kind of a very effective comedy.
First, before maybe Oliver says something on that, I just want to say that it's not a trial about the Rwandan genocide. It's not a film about the Rwandan genocide. And maybe we don't enter the records of making the first funny film about the Rwandan genocide. For us, it really isn't to do with that. It's to do with this one particular trial. It's really about universal jurisdiction and not about the Rwandan genocide.
Yeah, I would add to that, but yeah, so, I mean, we're in this position where we're watching the Finns do something in Rwanda, but we're always situated always in Finland, so we're just sort of watching this process, and these moments of, confusion or breakdown or the strange, sort of, these moments are often funny, and also, I guess the whole process, because it's, Finnish people going to Africa, and it's so polarized in all these things. There's a certain lightness to it, which I don't know. For me, it's very uncomfortable sort of humor, of course, because in the end it's about the genocide, but maybe it's about this connection, and whether that connection is actually working, or whether it's actually failing, and just sort of, I don't know. I get this feeling that it's kind of just moving around its own mechanism somehow, the mechanism of the law and this kind of exteriority.
And I think there's kind of two humors at work as well, in a way. One of them is the sort of, as Oliver says, the kind of inherent humor of the material itself, what it does, and specifically of the material that Thomas Elfgren, I don't know if Oliver introduced him in the talk at the beginning, but Thomas Elfgren, the guy we got the material from, the policeman who was living in Rwanda those 5 years, and whose voice is translated in the film and narrated by the simultaneous translator. The material that he edits himself, so this thing in the beginning, East Africa and Finland, a love story, and this scene with Boney M, that's his editing, that's his material. So actually there's times where we're looking through not only the official video material, but also the kind of unofficial sort of vision of the Finns in that context. And for us, that has a humor, especially the soundtrack that he puts on. But also this idea that the same person who is producing both the official court material is also producing this kind of documentation of the leisure time, of them going to safari, seeing the jungles, and doing this kind of thing. So that's one thing which is actually stuff that we haven't added in as a kind of device. And another thing, which is that essentially, and the reason why we're definitely not the first person to talk about sort of humor in the legal space, is because I think humor is inherent to the legal process. And especially here, where there's a kind of naivety about kind of doing the right thing and going there with the belief that that they will contribute to a process of justice. And the kind of small breakdowns in that, the things that slowly make this kind of trial a failure or impossible, is also funny. And so, yeah, I think there's something inherent to the material and also something inherent to universal jurisdiction that has within it its own sort of humor, in a way.
Yeah, I
don't know. Yeah.
I was just going to pick up on that point about, like, the position of us looking at this material on the screen, and how when you go through these archives, there is no separation in the images. What is official court material and what is his own sort of personal edited together films and footage are always on the same level. So you're always watching these two sort of, well, it doesn't matter how many different kinds of different images, they all sort of exist on the same plane in that sense. And I felt like that there was something about that process which to us was very strange, just encountering it from this position, and also makes you think a lot about what is actually carrying this sort of, this utopian ideal of universal jurisdiction and the media, and how the media actually does that, and how it records and what it is recording, and then what you're presented with.
And media is another layer on top of an already space which already has so much difficulty in communication. It's like, if you take a normal trial situation, all the kind of sort of white magic rituals of giving the oath, of speaking loud, of not being within the realms of kind of conversational communication, but your speech being in a kind of another space, which is all upheld by a kind of theatricality. I think if you look at these trials and you see the kind of forms of speech that takes place there is something funny about it. So this kind of layer of media, of technology, of spatial separation adds another layer of kind of to this sort of general communication breakdown that I think happens in your average criminal trial anyway. There's always a kind of process of translation that happens, or multiple processes of translation that need to happen, allow the kind of speech of the layman enter the kind of legalese, as they call it. And I think we see as a group a kind of an extension of all these sort of forms of speech, the protocols of justice, into the media infrastructure. And there's a kind of translation of that into the fiber optic cables and the threshold of pixel resolution that one has to maintain.
Hi, Lawrence. It's good to see you with such a big. I was just going to say, good to see you with such a big face.
Let's see if he gets big face back.
Yeah. Hi, Lawrence. I was just about to say it's really great to see you with such a big face, larger than life somehow.
Better than Bazarando's, yeah.
And there was this one particular moment which was really strange, a kind of awkward moment. I mean, there were many awkward moments, but this one was particularly revealing when it's unclear to me who this person was, the person who was speaking in English, who took the oath. I don't know who is this guy?
He's called Philip Renchins. He's an expert witness.
Okay.
And that was in Porvo.
Okay.
So it's in the
Okay. So and then his interpretation of the kind of vernacular word for, I would say, hustler, or what we call in Egypt fahlawi, or it has many different interpretations. But it's definitely not lying. It's something completely different. And I think at that moment there was a kind of the idea of universal jurisdiction was lost in translation, and it became somehow European, this European understanding of universality, definitely not a kind of one without its prejudices. And yeah, I don't know if you agree with that. Yeah. I mean, and was the reason for your incorporating this kind of footage of fascination with African nature and Bonnie M. It was a really strange choice of music. I mean, was this also part of kind of highlighting this kind of inherent bias in the whole process?
Exactly. I think that's the whole point of the film, to say that, I mean, to illustrate this problem from where universality is constructed. And I think all these kind of trips to safari, and like again, the Boney M is his edit. He put Boney M to that footage, so we didn't put it. It's material we have from the archive with Boney M already on the thing. So all those fascinations, and I think Oliver is more articulate on the Genge, but I think you really you really sort of outlined exactly what we were trying to say. Why incorporating this expert opinion on how Rwandans have a difficulty with the very truth.
Yeah, adding to that, the idea of quoting an idea that you can't understand, to be able then to incorporate it into the legal sphere is a very strange move. So like Obgenge in quotation marks is this thing that makes justice impossible, but we can still enact justice. It's a very strange kind of linguistic game.
It's a tool that I don't know, starts to erode in the mind of the I don't know who called him actually. Who called the extra witness? Was it the defense? It was the defense. The defense called it to say that a lot of what they had heard in the testimony was in fact lying. It was Rwandans practicing of Genge, and therefore it was the defense's argument that this whole trial was impossible. Actually, the whole process of universality is impossible because there is no consensus on what the truth is. But it has to kind of go through this very strange kind of anthropological European sort of colonial gaze to arrive there.
Filipa?
Just sending some pictures of you here in this room. I have a question, a very simple. I have a very simple question about the voice of the woman that is narrating. It's a first person. It's narrated in first person, and it's a voice of a woman as an accent. And I know you worked a lot about the question of accents and the instrumentalization of accents by courts or by other situations of control. And I was wondering, what was his choice and who is this woman?
This woman is a Finnish translator from English to Finnish. She works as a simultaneous translator in courts. For us, the voiceover is a narration that we wrote, but that we wrote through all the interviews we've done with the court, with the people. So in a way, the kind of she is the sort of voice of the Finns that we interviewed, and there's a kind of unofficial title for her, which we don't reveal. But when we were working together making the film, we had, which is the spirit of universal jurisdiction. So we wanted this kind of very sort of voice to be abstracted from any one real particular person within the trial, and actually to be as if the spirit of universal jurisdiction was embodied through this one police officer, had kind of come into him, and he was sort of speaking through it. So the idea of the gender is not so clear to us, but I think it was another means to produce a sort of distance. And the accent is Finnish. She has a thick Finnish accent, speaking English. Which is a sort of language, which is one of the two languages of the ICC, International Jurisdiction, UN is either. Sorry, not the UN, the International Criminal Court is conducted in English or French.
You have time for
You
want to say what?
No, I just wondered if no, let's have another question. Maybe all of it.
Yeah, we only have time for one. We already have two coming up.
Mine wasn't so much a question, but an observation. And in current today, the death of Mandela and the interpretation. I think the point that came out about the whole lack of communication, especially with in regards to the man that was doing I just want to be reflective when he was doing the death interpretation, apparently allegedly it was gibberish in regard to the gibberish.
Yeah, he said he had a schizophrenic episode and he saw angels. It's very difficult.
We had a discussion last night and someone said, what was your highlight? And that was, and that was one of the highlights, which is kind of a sad reflection of it.
Yeah, and also it's...
But because he was so animated in his, selfish questions, just an observation.
It's such a strange story because he was employed by this company that no longer exists, and there's all these strange structures that put this sort of translator in place, which is very sort of... And then when you realise that's a really weird space, that these things that you call that putting these people here, it's really weird.
Do you have any observation about that, Lawrence?
No, sorry, I didn't really follow the story. I just saw some images, and I don't really know so much the story. Make sure.
We can hear you well.
Okay, good.
Actually, this morning I read online a kind of, I don't know if it was a spoof or a caricature of that whole sign language story, which sort of somebody putting these words in the mouth of the sign language interpreter and saying, when he's sort of this fake interview where he's saying, well, in fact, I was there 1 meter from this man who has his hands full of blood, referring to Barack Obama, and I had a psychotic episode because I couldn't take it.
You didn't have a psychotic episode. The translator was the translation. Yeah. Okay.
Hiya. Congratulations on your fascinating film. Very interesting perspective on Africa, I think, as well, and the whole issue of universality. I noticed in the film, what I didn't know is were actually a lot of Rwandan voices. And I'm just wondering, was that a conscious decision that you made? I myself was lucky to have been to Rwanda a few years ago, reporting on some NGOs there, and my observation was that there is a lot of English spoken. So I know you were really focusing a lot on the whole translation issue of going from Finnish to Kenya, Rwandan, and back. But, did you... It just makes me think of, they cannot represent themselves, they must be represented, this kind of Frantz Fanon take on it. So I just wonder, was that a conscious move on your part as the filmmakers?
Um, you didn't have a psychotic episode.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Actually, this morning I read online a kind of Yeah, I don't know. I can't see Oliver. Do you want to respond, or should I?
You go first. I mean, I can go. Well, it's very good. We made a really conscious decision to, I mean, where we were looking from was all the time from this Finnish perspective. So anything that really comes to us of Rwanda is always through the filter of the Finnish lens, as it were. So all the ways that people participate in the trial, say like the translation chains and all those things, are just things that come through a questioning and sort of like working out how these sort of procedures take place. So in that sense, that's all we could see. That's all we could represent. So we couldn't really. We made a very conscious decision, but also within the constraints of what we were actually doing at this time. We are always situated in Finland, looking at Rwanda through this camera, or through these through this material that we're sort of associating with. So, yeah.
I mean, it does kind of really highlight in a way, like on the one hand, like it's great, you know, that justice was done, and you know, like in a way that's how come the Rwandan genocide, because the international community pulled out, you know, which can be seen as like that's the reason why the genocide really kind of happened, like in the first place. But you know, and it's great that you know the guy was convicted, but it seems also in a kind of paradoxical way that it also highlights kind of like post-coloniality to a certain degree. Mm-hmm. You know, I mean, it's like I'm not criticizing your work. I think it's great, but I think it does highlight that issue.
No, I mean, I think we felt also that if we went to Rwanda and interviewed them about this trial. In fact, there is a second part to this film that we're thinking we're still in development. That would be not so much about this trial at all, but would be in Rwanda from more the perspective of the fiber optic cables that are being laid down. So, but we felt if we went to Rwanda, we would and interviewed people and did all these things and mediated them, then we would just end up in the same problematics that we're addressing with the trial. And once someone also asked us, you know, they said in a conference situation, I mean, can the subaltern speak? Like, as a criticism of our film, they said, look, you're showing, you know, and we said, well, yeah, I mean, at the end of that essay, it's of course that they cannot speak. And this is exactly the reason why these systems are in place that, I mean, control and condition the speech of those people. So I think for us, of course, it's kind of continuous with the idea that we're trying to convey to the trial, the very absence of the Rwandan voice, or the way that the Rwandan voice enters the trial.
Okay, one last question.
Thanks again. I think what you're doing is highlighting in many ways, very concretely, the blindness to a lot of work done in feminist theory and post-colonial theory around the image of universality, the image of the universal courtroom, the image of the universal human being. And I was curious about that image of, it seems to confer a certain legitimacy that it's a Finnish group. It would be seen as an exercise in propaganda and a mock trial were it to be done elsewhere, I would imagine. You know, so there is a certain legitimacy. And again, what this brings up is not even so much neo-colonialism, but the persistence of a colonial mentality and the persistence of a colonial attitude. Because I can't imagine if it were done in other parts of the world that any legitimacy would be conferred in that process. It would not be taken seriously. And I think that's what's so interesting about this is, again, it plays into a lot of these discourses that have been silenced in recent times for different reasons, as though we've moved past colonialism, that we no longer need to think about these questions, that we can talk about generic equality. And who can speak and how this is framed, even in the context of something like a courtroom, with international systems of human rights, that this would be seen as a mock trial and propaganda were another body or another state to undertake it elsewhere.
Yeah, I mean, this question of like the equality of sovereignty, which obviously universality would rest upon, is really central and also fast, like to even think about it working the other way, you know, and then you say the nations that, I mean, Rwanda, the Rwandan government isn't happy about these processes. No one is happy about having their sovereignty overridden. So, like, so it's exactly that point about universality that isn't equal, and that most of the ICC cases are all of them, are in Africa at the moment. It's often commented about the sort of like one direction of universal justice, the international justice, which is obviously, if it's just going one way, then it still doesn't feel very universal, especially to people involved. Yes, that's exactly.
And I guess another really good point that you raised is that it's exactly that Finland does not have a colonial history that's interesting for us. And what makes the story much more interesting than, let's say, the Belgian trials of Rwandans, where the sort of jurisdiction, the residual jurisdiction over the African countries still persists and remains. Actually, in Finland, it's much more this idea, when we were speaking to them, that we must do something as humans. They much more had this, I felt at least that they had more this this approach, in the sense that a trial against humanity is a trial against us, and also this kind of wanting to raise their voice, specifically in their understanding, knowing that they are an unlikely source to do it. Not just Helsinki, but this town, Porvoo, which is a very small town, which they had to use the judges from that town. They didn't bring the kind of big Finnish judges in. They're really kind of village judges. So it was really, that particularly was interesting for us, the very fact that, exactly as you say, it's almost new colonialism, not neo-colonialism. It's not a return, it's a kind of another way in which it happens through these kind of media infrastructure and through their relationship to doing good in the world, development, a kind of development mentality that's burgeoning there, rather than the sort of return of subjects who they originally had jurisdiction and sovereignty over.
Yeah, also, yeah, I mean, also like the idea of this Finnish bubble, or this kind of not sharing in these history, and them existing as this kind of not neutral but not non-associated sort of force which then can come from the outside and judge upon these things. A very strong thing, but at the same time you have this really strange idea, just practical terms of the trial, where you have the persecuted in Finland completely removed from the situation where these crimes happen. There's like this massive geographical distance, and because of that there's a lot of problems with audience, like who is actually interested, who's watching these things. People think that, you know, he's being sort of catered for, and they sort of think about it, so like, you know, it's kind of a strange remove at the same time for this neutrality, but also to take the persecution, the trial, the sort of cause of the trial away from the people who probably would be interested in it, into this international space, which would think people would be very interested in, would sort of like, gain a lot of media attention, but it doesn't.
Yeah, I mean, they were really prepared for a full sort of media correspondence. They had all the press releases kind of memorized in their head when they went to see them, and we were literally the only people who arrived to inquire. I mean, they told us that, yeah, there was a couple of journalists at the beginning, but no one really is interested. And for us, that was interesting because we received this promotional and like kind of onslaught of kind of prepared material, waiting for journalists, and what they actually had was these sort of four artists who they couldn't really understand why they were so interested in sort of the Skype protocol rather than, all the other things that they were trying to do. So for them, it was also, we were a kind of disappointment for them, but and that was very clear in the meeting, I think, and it's a kind of interesting moment because they were very transparent about everything that was happening. More so than, let's say, any other thing that we'd researched in the past.
Yeah, and it's quite strange because as our interest continued, they became a bit less transparent. So I did not be too interested.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Oliver and Lawrence. We will break for lunch now for about an hour. We're starting at 2 o'clock with Filipa, César, and then Guerra. And I think we do have tea and coffee and sandwiches available. Unfortunately, not for you, Lawrence, sorry. And thanks again.